The arrow lodged in Owen Fletcher's shoulder burned like a brand, but he kept running through the pine forest, his boots skidding on wet needles as voices shouted behind him. He had been scouting too close to the border, and the patrol had spotted him before he could retreat back to safer territory, where the war had not yet poisoned every interaction between kingdoms. Blood soaked through his leather jerkin, warm and sticky, and his vision blurred at the edges as he stumbled over a root and crashed down an embankment he had not seen coming. The world spun, branches whipped his face, and then he hit something solid that knocked the remaining air from his lungs. When he opened his eyes, he found himself staring up at a thatched roof and rough timber beams, lying on something soft that smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. "You are awake," a voice said, feminine but cautious, and Owen turned his head to see her standing by a crude wooden table, green hands wrapped around a clay bowl. She was an orc, small for her kind, perhaps 5 feet and a few inches, with skin the color of spring moss and dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her tusks were delicate curves that barely protruded past her lower lip, and her pointed ears twitched slightly as she watched him with eyes the color of amber. She wore a simple wool dress, patched but clean, and her build was lean and strong in the way of someone who worked hard every day. "I found you by the creek. You had an arrow in you. I pulled it out." Owen tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his shoulder. "Where am I?" "My home," she said, setting the bowl down and coming closer but stopping a few feet away, as though afraid he might lunge at her. "You are on the borderlands. No patrols come this far into the forest usually. You were lucky to be shot." Owen managed a weak smile despite the throbbing in his shoulder. He was a tall man, just over 6 feet, with sandy hair and a weathered face that made him look older than his 24 years. He had been a soldier once, before the war had shown him too much blood and too little purpose, and he had deserted 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burning need to find somewhere the fighting had not yet reached. "Thank you for helping me. What is your name?" The orc woman hesitated, her amber eyes searching his face for something, perhaps malice or disgust, but Owen only looked at her with genuine gratitude. "Mira," she said finally. "Mira Larkin." "Owen Fletcher," he replied, and then because the pain was making him lightheaded he added, "I am sorry for bleeding all over your floor." Mira glanced at the small puddle of blood near the door and shrugged. "I have cleaned worse. Can you sit up? You should drink something." With her help, Owen managed to prop himself against the rough wall, and she brought him water in a wooden cup that he drank gratefully. The cabin was small, just one room with a sleeping pallet in the corner, a table and 2 chairs, a fireplace where a pot bubbled quietly, and shelves lined with jars and bundles of dried plants. Through the single window he could see dense forest and nothing else, no other buildings or signs of civilization. "Do you live here alone?" "Yes," Mira said, sitting down on one of the chairs and watching him carefully. "I have been here 2 years. Before that, I lived in a settlement to the east, but there was trouble. Humans came and burned it. I ran." Owen felt something twist in his chest, shame and anger mixed together. "I am sorry." "Why, you did not do it." "No, but my people did." Mira looked at him for a long moment, and then she stood and went back to the fireplace, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. "You need to rest. The wound was not deep, but you lost blood. I put salve on it. It will heal if you do not do anything stupid." "What counts as stupid?" "Running through the forest with an arrow in you," Mira said, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "That was very stupid." Despite everything, Owen laughed and then winced because laughing pulled at his shoulder. "Fair point. How long was I unconscious?" "Half a day." It is evening now. The light through the window was indeed fading, turning the forest into a tangle of shadows. Owen realized he was ravenously hungry, and as though reading his mind, Mira ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to him along with a chunk of dark bread. The stew was simple, root vegetables and herbs, but it was hot and filling, and Owen ate it slowly, savoring each bite. Mira sat across from him with her own bowl, eating in silence, and Owen studied her when he thought she was not looking. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe 20 or 21, and there was a wariness in the way she held herself, as though she expected him to turn on her at any moment. He could not blame her for that. "Thank you," he said when he had finished. "You did not have to help me." "I know," Mira said quietly, "but I did anyway." "Why?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Owen saw something haunted in her amber eyes. "Because no one helped me when I needed it. I do not want to be like them." Owen did not know what to say to that, so he simply nodded, and they sat in companionable silence as the darkness deepened outside. Mira eventually stood and lit a small oil lamp, and then she checked his bandage, her green fingers gentle as she peeled back the cloth to inspect the wound. Her touch sent an unexpected shiver through him, and Owen told himself it was just because he was injured and exhausted, nothing more. But when she caught him looking at her, something flickered in her expression, a question or maybe a fear, and she quickly stepped back. "You should sleep," she said, her voice a little too brisk. "I will keep the fire going." "Where will you sleep?" "I will manage. Just rest." Owen wanted to argue, but his body had other ideas, and within minutes he had drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he woke, pale morning light was filtering through the window, and Mira was curled up in one of the chairs, her head resting on her arms on the table, fast asleep. Owen watched her for a moment, guilt gnawing at him for taking her bed, and then he carefully pushed himself to his feet. His shoulder protested but held, and he made his way to the fireplace, adding wood as quietly as he could and stirring the embers back to life. There was water in a bucket, and he filled the kettle and hung it over the fire, figuring he could at least make himself useful. Mira woke as the water began to boil, jerking upright with a startled gasp, and then she saw him and relaxed slightly. "You should not be up." "I feel better," Owen said, which was only half a lie. "And you should not have slept in a chair. I could have managed the floor. You were bleeding. You needed the bed. And you needed sleep." They stared at each other for a moment, and then Mira sighed and stood, rolling her shoulders to work out the stiffness. "You are stubborn." "So are you," Owen replied, and this time when she almost smiled, he felt a small flicker of warmth in his chest. They shared a simple breakfast of porridge and dried fruit, and then Mira changed his bandage again, her movements efficient but careful. The wound looked better, the edges clean and already beginning to close, and Owen marveled at whatever salve she had used. "What is in that?" he asked, nodding at the jar she held. "Yarrow, comfrey, a few other things. My mother taught me. She was a healer." Mira nodded, something sad crossing her face. She was. She died when the settlement burned. Owen felt the words like a punch to the gut. "Mira, I am so sorry." "I know," she said softly, and then she finished wrapping the bandage and stood. "You should stay a few more days. Let it heal properly before you try to travel." "I do not want to impose." "You already did," Mira said, but there was no real bite to it. "A few more days will not make much difference." So Owen stayed. The first day he mostly rested, but by the second he was restless and insisted on helping with chores despite Mira's protests. He chopped wood for the fire, his shoulder aching but manageable, and he repaired a loose shutter that had been rattling in the wind. Mira watched him with a mixture of exasperation and something that might have been amusement, and when he accidentally hit his thumb with the hammer and swore, she laughed outright, a sound that transformed her whole face. "You are terrible at this," she said. "I am a soldier, not a carpenter," Owen replied, shaking his injured hand. "Well, I was a soldier, not anymore." "Why did you stop?" Owen hesitated, but there was something about Mira that made him want to be honest. "Because I was tired of killing people who never did anything to me. Tired of orders that did not make sense. Tired of watching friends die for land that would just change hands again next year. So I left. They will call you a deserter. They already do. But I would rather be a living deserter than a dead hero." Mira studied him for a long moment. "That is brave, in its own way, or cowardly." "No," she said firmly. "It takes courage to walk away from what everyone expects of you, I know that." They worked in silence after that, and as the days passed, Owen found himself settling into a rhythm. He would wake early and tend the fire. Mira would make breakfast, and then they would work together on whatever needed doing. Mira had a small garden behind the cabin, and Owen helped her weed and harvest the last of the autumn vegetables. She was teaching herself to read from an old book she had found, and in the evenings Owen would help her sound out the words, surprised to find that he enjoyed it. She was quick and clever, and she remembered everything he told her. A week after he had arrived, Owen was sitting by the fire, mending a tear in his shirt when Mira came in from outside with her arms full of firewood. She dumped it by the hearth and then sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, and then she looked up at him with those amber eyes. "Am I ugly to you, human?" The question hit Owen like a physical blow, and for a moment he could only stare at her, his needle frozen mid-stitch. Mira was watching him with an intensity that made his heart pound, and he saw vulnerability there, raw and painful, as though his answer mattered more than anything else in the world. He set the shirt aside and leaned forward, holding her gaze. "No," he said quietly, and his voice was steady even though his pulse was racing. "You are not ugly to me, Mira, not even a little bit." "You do not have to lie," she said, but her voice wavered. "I know what humans think of orcs. I have heard it all. Monster, beast, savage. I know what I look like to you." "You look beautiful," Owen said, and he saw her eyes widen in shock. "I mean that. I have thought so since the first time I saw you. Your eyes are like amber in sunlight. Your smile, the few times I have seen it, lights up your whole face. The way you move, so careful and graceful. The way you bite your lip when you are concentrating on reading. Everything about you is beautiful to me." Mira was trembling, her hands clenched in her lap, and Owen saw tears glittering in her eyes. "Why would you say that?" "Because it is true," Owen said simply. "And because I think you deserve to hear it. Someone should have told you a long time ago." For a moment, Mira just sat there, shaking, and then she stood abruptly and turned away, her shoulders hunched. Owen thought he had made a terrible mistake, but then he heard her voice, thick with tears. "No one has ever said anything like that to me. Ever. Humans look at me like I am dirt, like I am something to scrape off their boots. And my own people in the settlement, they said I was too small, too weak. Not a real orc. I have never been enough for anyone." Owen stood and crossed to her, and without thinking he gently touched her shoulder. She flinched but did not pull away, and he turned her to face him, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "You are enough," he said fiercely. "You are more than enough. You saved my life. You took in a stranger, a human stranger, when you had every reason to let me die. You are kind and smart and strong, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool." A tear slid down Mira's green cheek, and Owen gently brushed it away with his thumb, marveling at the softness of her skin. She stared up at him, her lips parted in surprise, and then she did something that shocked them both. She leaned forward and kissed him, a brief, tentative press of her lips against his. It lasted only a second before she pulled back, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have." Owen kissed her back, cutting off her words, and this time it was slower, deeper, his hands coming up to cradle her face. Mira made a soft sound in the back of her throat and her arms came around him, her fingers gripping the back of his shirt as though she was afraid he would disappear. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for days," he admitted. "So have I," Mira said, and then she laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound. "I thought I was imagining things. The way you looked at me sometimes, I thought it was just wishful thinking." "It was not," Owen said, and he kissed her again, softer this time, and felt her melt against him. They stood there by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in a long time, Owen felt like he had found something worth staying for. The next few days were a revelation. Owen and Mira could not seem to keep their hands off each other, stealing kisses whenever they passed, holding hands while they worked, sitting close by the fire in the evenings. Mira bloomed under the attention, her smiles coming more easily, her laughter ringing through the cabin. Owen found himself more relaxed than he had been in years, the constant tension of war and survival finally easing. But he knew they could not stay hidden in the forest forever. His shoulder was nearly healed, and soon he would have to decide what to do next. One afternoon, as they were bringing in water from the creek, Mira broached the subject. "What will you do when you are fully healed?" Owen set down the bucket and looked at her. "I do not know. I cannot go back to my unit. They will hang me for desertion. I thought maybe I could find work somewhere far from the war. Start over." "Where?" "I heard there are settlements to the west, beyond the mountains. Frontier towns that do not care about the war. I thought I might go there." Mira was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very carefully, "Would you want company?" Owen's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying you would come with me?" "If you wanted me to," Mira said, not meeting his eyes. "I know it would be hard. People do not like orcs, and they definitely do not like humans and orcs together. But I do not want to stay here alone anymore, and I do not want to lose you." Owen took her hands in his, and when she finally looked up at him, he smiled. "I would love for you to come with me, more than anything." "You are sure? It will not be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Owen said, "but I would rather face it with you than be without you." Mira kissed him then, fierce and joyful, and Owen wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. They spent the rest of the day planning, going through Mira's meager possessions, and deciding what to take and what to leave. She had a sturdy pack, some traveling clothes, her healing supplies, and the book Owen had been teaching her from. Owen had even less, just the clothes on his back and a knife, but he did not care. They would figure it out together. They decided to leave in 3 days, giving Owen's shoulder a little more time to heal and allowing them to prepare properly. Mira showed Owen the best trails through the forest, the ones that avoided the patrols and the areas where bandits were known to lurk. She was surprisingly knowledgeable about the wilderness, and Owen realized she had spent the last 2 years learning every inch of the surrounding land, always ready to run if she had to. It made his chest ache to think of her living in such constant fear. On their last night in the cabin, they sat by the fire, and Mira leaned against Owen's side, his arm around her shoulders. "Are you scared?" she asked. "A little," Owen admitted. "But I am more excited than scared. What about you?" "The same. I have been alone for so long. It feels strange to have someone to depend on. Strange but good." "You can depend on me," Owen said, kissing the top of her head. "I promise." They made love that night, slow and tender, learning each other's bodies in the firelight. Mira was shy at first, but Owen was patient, whispering reassurances and pressing kisses to every inch of her green skin until she relaxed and let herself feel. Afterwards, they lay tangled together on the pallet, Mira's head on Owen's chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. She fell asleep like that, safe and warm, and Owen stayed awake a little longer, listening to the sound of her breathing and feeling a contentment he had never known before. They left at dawn, shouldering their packs and taking one last look at the cabin that had brought them together. Mira locked the door and tucked the key under a loose stone, a small ritual that made Owen smile. Maybe she was not ready to let go completely, and that was all right. They had time. The journey west was harder than Owen had anticipated. The mountain passes were steep and treacherous, and autumn was giving way to winter, the air growing colder each day. They traveled mostly on foot, following game trails and old trade routes that had been abandoned when the war shifted the borders. Mira proved to be an excellent traveling companion, resourceful and uncomplaining, and her knowledge of plants and herbs kept them fed even when game was scarce. Owen used his military training to keep them safe, always alert for danger, and at night they would huddle together under a shared blanket, whispering plans and dreams until sleep claimed them. They avoided settlements at first, not wanting to deal with the stares and hostility, but 2 weeks into the journey they ran out of salt and had to stop in a small border village to trade. The moment they walked into the market square, Owen felt the eyes on them, curious and hostile in equal measure. A human and an orc traveling together, clearly close. It was unheard of in these parts. Mira kept her head down, her hand tight in Owen's, and they made their way to a merchant stall that sold basic supplies. The merchant, a grizzled old man with a scar across his cheek, looked them up and down and then spat on the ground. "We do not serve orcs here." "She is with me," Owen said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "We just need salt and maybe some flour. We can pay." "I do not care if you can pay. I said we do not serve orcs." Owen felt Mira tense beside him, and he squeezed her hand gently. "Please, we are just passing through. We will not cause any trouble." "Too late for that," the merchant said, and he jerked his chin toward the growing crowd behind them. Owen turned and saw a dozen villagers, some of them holding tools that could easily become weapons. His heart sank. This was exactly what he had been afraid of. "We do not want any trouble," he said loudly, addressing the crowd. "We are just travelers. We will buy what we need and be on our way." "Travelers," a woman called out, "you are a deserter. I can see the mark on your jerkin, and you bring a greenskin into our village." "She has a name," Owen said, his temper flaring, "and she has done nothing to you." "Her kind killed my son," another man shouted. "Raiding party came through last spring, burned half the fields." "That was not her," Owen said desperately. "She has been living alone in the forest for 2 years. She had nothing to do with any raids." "Orcs are all the same," the merchant said, and the crowd rumbled in agreement. Owen saw them closing in, and he put himself between them and Mira, his hand going to the knife at his belt. He did not want to fight, but he would if he had to. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice hard. "You want to blame someone, blame the people who started this war. Blame the lords who send young men to die over borders that do not matter. But do not blame her for things she did not do." For a moment, no one moved, and Owen thought maybe, just maybe, they would listen. But then a stone flew through the air and struck Mira on the shoulder, and she cried out in pain. Owen saw red. He drew his knife and took a step forward, and the crowd hesitated, some of them backing up. But then a voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. "Enough!" An older woman pushed through the crowd, leaning on a cane, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had the air of someone used to being obeyed, and the villagers parted for her. She stopped in front of Owen and Mira, looking them both up and down with shrewd eyes. "I am the elder here," she said. "What is your business in this village?" "We just need supplies," Owen said, his knife still drawn but lowered. "We are heading west. We will not stay long." The elder looked at Mira, who was holding her shoulder where the stone had hit, and something softened in her expression. "You are hurt." "It is nothing," Mira said quietly. "It is not nothing," the elder said, and she turned to the crowd. "Shame on you. Attacking a young woman who has done nothing. Is this what we have become? No better than the raiders we claim to despise." The crowd muttered but did not argue, and the elder gestured to Owen and Mira. "Come with me. I will get you what you need." Owen hesitated, but Mira tugged on his hand, and they followed the elder through the village to a small house at the edge of the square. Inside, the elder gestured for them to sit, and then bustled about, gathering salt, flour, and dried meat, which she packed into a cloth sack. She also brought a salve and gently applied it to Mira's shoulder, murmuring apologies. "I am sorry for my people," she said. "The war has made everyone afraid, but that is no excuse for cruelty." "Thank you," Mira said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did not have to help us." "Yes, I did," the elder said. "Because if we lose our compassion, what are we fighting for?" She handed the sack to Owen and waved away his offer of payment. "Take it, and go quickly. I can keep them calm for now, but I do not know how long it will last." Owen and Mira left the village as fast as they could without running, and they did not stop until they were miles away, deep in the forest again. Only then did Mira let herself cry, great shaking sobs that tore at Owen's heart. He held her and let her get it all out, anger and fear and grief, and when she finally quieted, he tilted her face up and kissed her forehead. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have protected you better." "You did protect me," Mira said. "You stood up for me. No one has ever done that before." "I will always stand up for you," Owen said. "Always." They continued west, and the incident in the village made them more cautious. They avoided settlements entirely after that, relying on Mira's foraging skills and Owen's ability to trap small game. The mountains grew steeper and the air thinner, but they pressed on, driven by the promise of something better on the other side. They talked as they walked, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's fears and hopes. Owen told Mira about growing up on a farm, how he had joined the army because it seemed like the only way to make something of himself, and how he had come to regret that choice. Mira told Owen about her mother, the healer, and how she had tried to teach Mira to see the good in people even when they were cruel. She told him about the night the settlement burned, how she had run and not looked back, and how the guilt of surviving still haunted her. "You should not feel guilty for surviving," Owen said gently. "Your mother would want you to live." "I know," Mira said, "but knowing and feeling are not the same thing." "No, they are not," Owen agreed. "But maybe we can help each other with that, carry the weight together." Mira smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I would like that." They crossed the mountains just as the first snow began to fall, and on the other side they found the frontier lands, wide open and wild, dotted with small homesteads and settlements that cared more about hard work than politics. They stopped at a trading post to ask about work, and the trader, a rough-looking man with kind eyes, told them there was a homestead about a day's walk south that was looking for help. The owner was an old widower who could not manage the farm on his own anymore. "He does not care what you are as long as you can work," the trader said, glancing at Mira. "Name is Garrett Foster. Good man. Tell him Samuel sent you." Owen and Mira thanked him and headed south, hope kindling in their chests. They found the homestead late the next afternoon, a sprawling piece of land with fields that had been harvested for the year, a sturdy barn, and a house that had seen better days. The owner, Garrett Foster, was exactly as Samuel had described, a white-haired man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense attitude. He looked them over, his gaze lingering on Mira, and then he nodded. "Samuel sent you." "Yes, sir," Owen said. "We heard you need help." "I do. My sons went off to fight in the war, and I have not heard from them in 2 years. I cannot keep this place going alone. You know farming." "I grew up on a farm," Owen said. "I know the basics. Mira knows plants and healing. We are hard workers, and we are looking for a place to settle." Garrett considered this, and then he looked at Mira. "You are an orc." "Yes, sir," Mira said quietly. "Can you work as hard as he says?" "Yes, sir," Garrett grunted. "Then I do not care what you are. I need help and you need work. Room and board plus a share of the profits when we sell the harvest. Sound fair?" Owen looked at Mira and she nodded, her eyes bright. "More than fair," Owen said. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Garrett said, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "You will earn every bit of it. Come on, I will show you where you can stay." He led them to a small cottage at the edge of the property, a 2-room building that had been used for hired hands in the past. It was dusty and needed some work, but it was solid and dry, and Mira looked at it like it was a palace. Owen felt a lump in his throat. This was it. A place to call their own, at least for now. A chance to start over. They threw themselves into the work with a will. Owen repaired fences and plowed the fields, preparing them for spring planting. Mira helped with the animals, tending the chickens and the goats, and she started a garden of her own behind the cottage, planting the seeds she had brought from her cabin. Garrett was a fair employer, gruff but not unkind, and he did not bat an eye at the fact that Owen and Mira were clearly together. He treated them with the same respect he would any workers, and slowly, Owen and Mira began to relax. Winter set in hard, and the work slowed, but there was always something to do. Owen learned to fix the tools and mend the barn roof, and Mira spent the long evenings teaching him more about plants and healing, using the books Garrett had in his house. They made friends with the neighboring homesteaders, cautiously at first, but most people on the frontier were more interested in survival than in old prejudices. There were a few who muttered about the orc woman, but when they saw how hard Mira worked and how much Owen clearly loved her, they kept their opinions to themselves. As the winter wore on, Owen realized he was happier than he had ever been. He woke each morning next to Mira, worked hard all day, and fell asleep each night with her in his arms. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and that was enough. One evening, as they sat by the fire in their cottage, Mira sewing a patch on one of Owen's shirts and Owen whittling a new handle for a hoe, she looked up at him with a soft smile. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the future. About us." Owen set down the wood and the knife and gave her his full attention. "What about us?" Mira bit her lip, and Owen saw nervousness in her eyes. "I know we have only been together a few months, and I know things are still uncertain, but I love you, Owen. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone, and I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just working for someone else but something of our own." Owen's heart was pounding. "I want that too, more than anything." "Then maybe we should make it official," Mira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should get married." Owen stared at her and then he laughed, a joyful, disbelieving sound, and pulled her into his arms. "Are you proposing to me?" "Maybe I am," Mira said, laughing too. "Is that allowed?" "I do not care if it is allowed or not," Owen said, and he kissed her hard. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I will marry you tomorrow if you want." "Tomorrow might be too soon," Mira said, her eyes shining, "but soon, before spring." They told Garrett the next day, and the old man surprised them by clapping Owen on the back and hugging Mira. "About time," he said. I was wondering when you two would stop dancing around it. You knew, Owen asked. I am old, not blind, Garrett said. You are good together. I am happy for you. Finding someone to perform the ceremony was harder. Most of the preachers in the area were reluctant to marry a human and an orc, citing tradition or scripture or simple prejudice. But Mira and Owen were determined, and eventually they found a traveling priest, a young man named Thomas who believed that love was love, no matter the species. He agreed to marry them in a small ceremony at Garrett's homestead, and they set the date for the first day of spring. Mira sewed herself a new dress, simple but beautiful, dyed a soft blue that complemented her green skin. Owen borrowed a clean shirt from Garrett and scrubbed himself until he shone. On the appointed day, their few friends gathered in Garrett's front yard, and Thomas spoke the words that bound them together. When Owen kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. Mira was crying, and so was Owen, and even Garrett had to wipe his eyes. They celebrated with a simple meal, roasted chicken and fresh bread, and a cake that one of the neighbor women had baked. Someone brought out a fiddle, and there was dancing, awkward and joyful, and Mira laughed so hard she could barely breathe when Owen stepped on her feet for the third time. As the sun set and the guests began to drift home, Owen and Mira slipped away to their cottage, hand in hand, and spent their wedding night wrapped in each other, whispering promises and making love until the stars faded and the first light of dawn crept through the window. Spring came, and with it, new life. Mira's garden flourished, and Owen helped Garrett plant the fields. They talked about saving money to buy their own land someday, a small farm where they could raise a family. Mira had not said anything yet, but Owen suspected she might already be pregnant, the way she had been feeling sick in the mornings and craving strange combinations of food. He did not press her, waiting for her to tell him when she was ready. One evening in late spring, Mira came to him with a shy smile and took his hand, placing it on her still flat stomach. "There is someone I want you to meet," she said. Owen's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I have been sure for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you." Owen let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Mira asked, and there was just a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Happy." Owen set her down and cupped her face in his hands. "I am over the moon. I am terrified and excited and so happy. You have given me everything, Mira. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you so much." "I love you too," Mira said, and they held each other as the sun set, the future stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. The pregnancy was not easy. Mira suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and there were moments when Owen feared for her health. But she was strong, and with the help of the neighbor women who warmed to her once they saw how devoted Owen was, she weathered it. As her belly grew, so did Owen's protectiveness, and he fussed over her constantly until she finally told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. But she said it with a smile, and Owen knew she appreciated the attention. Garrett was delighted at the news and insisted they stay in the cottage rent-free, calling it a baby gift. He also promised to teach the child everything he knew about farming, assuming they stayed on the homestead. Owen and Mira talked long into the night about what kind of life they wanted for their child, and they agreed that the frontier, with all its challenges, was still a better place than the war-torn lands they had left behind. Here, their child would have a chance to grow up without the weight of prejudice, or at least with less of it. As summer turned to autumn, Mira's due date approached. Owen was a nervous wreck, checking on her constantly, making sure she had everything she needed. One night in early autumn, Mira woke him with a gasp, her hand gripping his arm. "It is time," she said, and Owen's heart leaped into his throat. He ran to fetch the midwife, a kind woman named Marta who had delivered half the babies in the area, and she took charge with calm efficiency. Owen was banished to the other room, where he paced and worried and prayed to any god who would listen. The labor was long, and there were moments when Owen heard Mira cry out and he wanted to burst through the door, but Marta had warned him to stay put, and he forced himself to obey. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, high and indignant, and then Marta's voice calling him in. Owen stumbled into the bedroom to find Mira propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and held out the baby. "It is a boy," she said. "We have a son." Owen took the baby with shaking hands and looked down at the tiny face. The baby had Owen's sandy hair and Mira's amber eyes, and his skin was a pale green, a perfect blend of both his parents. He was beautiful, perfect. Owen felt tears spill down his own cheeks as he kissed Mira's forehead and then gently placed the baby back in her arms. "What should we call him?" Mira asked. Owen thought for a moment and then he smiled. "Yoren, after your father." Mira's eyes widened. "You remembered." "Of course I did. You told me he was a good man. I want our son to carry his name." Mira sobbed and pulled Owen down for a kiss. The baby nestled safely between them. "Owen Fletcher. I love it." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diapers, but Owen and Mira would not have traded it for anything. Owen was a healthy, happy baby, and he grew quickly, reaching for everything with chubby little hands. Garrett doted on him like a grandfather, carving him little wooden toys and telling him stories, even though Owen was too young to understand. The neighbors stopped by to bring gifts and offer congratulations, and even the ones who had been wary of Mira could not help but smile at the sight of the baby. As Owen's first birthday approached, Owen and Mira made a decision. They had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land, just a few acres, but it was theirs. Garrett was sad to see them go, but he understood, and he promised to visit often. Owen and Mira built a small cabin on their new land, working side by side just as they had in the beginning. And by the time winter set in, they had a snug home with a good fireplace and room for Owen to grow. One evening, as they sat by the fire in their new home, Owen asleep in his cradle and the world quiet outside, Mira leaned against Owen's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked. "All the time," Owen said, wrapping his arm around her. "I think about the day I stumbled into your cabin, bleeding and half dead. I think about how you could have turned me away, but you did not. I think about how you saved my life in more ways than one." "I think about that day too," Mira said. "I think about how scared I was. And how you looked at me, really looked at me, and did not see a monster. You saw me." "You were never a monster," Owen said. "You were always just Mira. Beautiful, brave, kind Mira." She turned to kiss him, and they sat there in the firelight, holding each other, their son sleeping peacefully nearby. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the world in white, but inside, everything was warm and safe. They had faced prejudice and hardship, danger and doubt, but they had come through it together, and they had built something real and lasting. A home, a family, a future. Years passed, and their family grew. Mira gave birth to a second son, whom they named Felix, and then a third, Cade. The boys were a handful, full of energy and curiosity, but they were loved fiercely by both their parents. Owen taught them to farm and hunt, and Mira taught them about plants and healing. Owen, as the eldest, took his responsibilities seriously, always looking out for his younger brothers, and Owen saw so much of Mira in him, the same quiet strength and compassion. The frontier continued to change around them. The war eventually ended, though the peace was fragile and more settlers arrived, drawn by the promise of land and freedom. Some brought their prejudices with them, but others were more open-minded, and slowly, the sight of humans and orcs living and working together became less shocking. Owen and Mira's farm became a gathering place for their neighbors, a place where everyone was welcome regardless of species, and their children grew up with friends of all kinds. One autumn evening, when Yoren was 10 and already nearly as tall as Mira, the family sat around the dinner table, and Yoren asked a question that made Owen and Mira exchange a glance. "Papa, Mama, why do some people not like that you are married?" Owen set down his fork and considered his answer carefully. "Because some people are afraid of things that are different. They think that because your mama is an orc and I am a human, we should not be together, but they are wrong." "Why are they wrong?" Yoren asked, his amber eyes wide and curious. "Because love does not care about things like that," Mira said gently. "Love is about finding someone who makes you better, who stands by you when things are hard, who sees you for who you really are. Your papa and I found that in each other, and nothing else matters." "I think you and Papa are perfect together," Felix piped up, and Cade nodded enthusiastically, his mouth full of bread. Owen laughed and ruffled Felix's hair. "Thank you, son. We think so too." That night, after the boys were asleep, Owen and Mira stood outside their cabin looking up at the stars. Mira leaned against Owen, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, a mix of herbs and wood smoke that he had come to associate with home. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met?" Mira asked softly. "Sometimes," Owen admitted, "but I try not to. I do not like to think about a world where I did not have you." "I feel the same," Mira said. "You gave me everything I thought I could never have, a home, a family. Someone who loves me. I will never stop being grateful for that." "You do not have to be grateful," Owen said, turning her to face him. "You gave me just as much, more even. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive." Mira smiled, and it was the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago, bright and full of warmth. "I love you, Owen Fletcher." "I love you too, Mira Fletcher," Owen said, and he kissed her under the stars, surrounded by the life they had built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard winters when the crops failed and money was tight, but they weathered them together. There were illnesses and injuries, but Mira's healing skills and Owen's stubborn refusal to give up saw them through. There were moments of doubt and fear, but they faced them hand in hand, never letting go. When Yoren turned 16, he announced that he wanted to apprentice with a master carpenter in the nearest town, and though Mira worried, Owen encouraged him to follow his dream. Felix showed a talent for working with animals and took over the care of the livestock, expanding their small herd until they were one of the most prosperous farms in the area. Cade, the youngest, inherited Mira's love of plants and spent hours in the garden, experimenting with new crops and hybrids. One spring morning, when Owen was 45 and Mira 42, they stood on the porch of their cabin and watched their sons working in the fields, strong young men now, and Mira sighed with contentment. "We did well, did we not?" "We did," Owen agreed, slipping his arm around her waist. "We raised good boys, built a good life." "I never thought I would have this," Mira said, her voice soft. "When I was alone in that cabin in the forest, I thought I would spend my whole life hiding, and then you stumbled into my life, bleeding and stubborn, and everything changed." "Best decision I ever made, getting shot near your cabin," Owen said with a grin, and Mira laughed and swatted his arm. "You are impossible. And you love me anyway." "I do," Mira said, and she kissed him, and it was as sweet as the first time. They stood there on the porch, holding each other, the morning sun warming their faces, and Owen thought about that night by the fire so many years ago when Mira had asked him if she was ugly. He thought about how he had answered, and how that answer had changed both their lives. He thought about the journey they had taken, from two lost souls running from their pasts to a family, a home, a legacy. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Joran announced that he was planning to marry a girl from the town, a sweet-natured young woman named Clara. Mira cried happy tears, and Owen shook his son's hand, pride swelling in his chest. Felix and Cade teased their older brother mercilessly, but it was clear they were happy for him too. The wedding was held in the spring, a joyful affair with friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate. Owen walked Joran down the aisle, or rather stood beside him, and when the young couple exchanged vows, he could not help but think of his own wedding day, how nervous he had been, how radiant Mira had looked. He glanced over at her now, sitting in the front row with Felix and Cade, and she caught his eye and smiled, and Owen felt his heart swell with love all over again. After the wedding, life settled back into its familiar rhythms. Joran and Clara built a small house near the carpentry shop where Joran worked, and they visited often, bringing news and laughter. Felix took over more of the farm work, allowing Owen to slow down a bit, and Cade's experimental garden became the talk of the region, his hybrid vegetables fetching high prices at the market. One evening, as Owen and Mira sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mira rested her head on his shoulder and said, "I think I would like another child." Owen looked at her in surprise. "Another child? Mira, we are not young anymore." "I know," she said, a wistful note in her voice. "But I miss having a little one around. The boys are all grown now. It feels too quiet." Owen considered this, and then he smiled. "If that is what you want, then I am willing to try." Mira kissed him, and a few months later, to their delight and surprise, she discovered she was pregnant again. The pregnancy was harder this time, her body older and less resilient, but she refused to complain. The boys fussed over her, and Owen barely let her lift a finger, and when the baby finally arrived on a crisp autumn morning, it was a girl. She had Mira's green skin and Owen's sandy hair, and her eyes were a striking mix of both green gold and full of curiosity. They named her Kyra, and she became the darling of the family. Joran and Clara doted on their little sister, and Felix and Cade treated her like a precious treasure. Owen and Mira watched her grow with a mixture of joy and bittersweet awareness that she would likely be their last child. They cherished every moment, every smile, every milestone. As Kyra grew, she showed a fierce independence and a quick mind, and Mira saw so much of herself in her daughter. She taught Kyra everything she knew about healing and plants, and Kyra soaked it up like a sponge. Owen taught her to read and write, and she devoured every book she could get her hands on. By the time she was 10, she was already talking about becoming a healer, traveling the frontier and helping people the way her mother had helped her father. One winter evening, when Kyra was 12, she asked the question that Mira had been waiting for. They were sitting by the fire, Mira mending a shirt and Kyra practicing her letters, when Kyra looked up and said, "Mama, did people really hate you and Papa for being together?" Mira set down the mending and met her daughter's eyes. "Some did. Not everyone, but enough. It was hard sometimes. But you did not let it stop you." "No," Mira said, "because what we had was too important. Your Papa saw me, really saw me, when everyone else looked through me or turned away. He made me feel like I mattered, and I could not let anyone take that away." Kyra nodded slowly. I want to find someone like that someday, someone who sees me. You will, Mira said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. And when you do, hold on to them. Do not let fear or prejudice or anything else get in the way. I will not, Kyra promised, and Mira smiled, knowing her daughter would keep that promise. The years rolled on, and the family continued to grow and change. Joran and Clara had 2 children of their own, and Felix married a neighbor girl and started his own farm. Cade remained unmarried, too focused on his plants to think about romance, but he seemed content. Kyra grew into a beautiful young woman, confident and compassionate, and she left home at 18 to study healing with a renowned teacher in a distant town. Owen and Mira missed her terribly, but they were proud of her, and they knew she would do great things. As Owen and Mira entered their 60s, they began to slow down, the years of hard work taking their toll on their bodies. But they were happy, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, secure in the life they had built. They spent their days tending a smaller garden, entertaining visitors, and simply being together, and that was enough. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Mira turned to Owen and said, "Do you have any regrets?" Owen looked at her, and he thought about the question. He thought about the war he had run from, the life he had left behind, the hardships they had faced. And then he thought about Mira, about their children, about the love that had sustained them through it all, and he shook his head. "Not a single one," he said. "Every choice I made led me to you." "How could I regret that?" Mira smiled, and it was the smile he had fallen in love with, the one that lit up her whole face. "I feel the same." They sat there in the fading light, hand in hand, and Owen realized that this was the moment he had been working toward his whole life. Not glory or riches or fame, but this. A quiet evening with the woman he loved, surrounded by the family they had created, knowing that they had lived well and loved deeply. It was more than enough. It was everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mira leaned her head on Owen's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. And in that moment, surrounded by the laughter of their grandchildren and the warmth of their home, Owen Fletcher and Mira Fletcher knew that they had found what so many spend their whole lives searching for. They had found each other, and they had built a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The fire of their love, kindled on that long-ago night when a wounded man asked an orc woman for shelter, burned bright and true, a beacon of hope in a world that too often chose fear over compassion. And as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Owen and Mira held each other and knew, beyond any doubt, that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their story was one of courage and kindness, of 2 people who refused to let the world tell them who they could love. And in refusing, they had changed that world, one small act of defiance at a time. And though the years would eventually claim them, as years do, the love they had shared and the family they had built would go on, a testament to the simple truth that Mira had learned on that night by the fire when Owen had looked into her eyes and told her she was beautiful. Love sees past the surface. Love sees the soul. And when you find someone who sees you, truly sees you, you hold on to them with everything you have, and you build a life together, brick by brick, day by day, until the end of your days. That was the gift Owen and Mira had given each other, and it was a gift that would echo through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love can light the way home.